The stitches on my palm were still pulling when my son called, 3 days after Thanksgiving Monday. I was sitting in the chair by the front window, the one with the worn armrest on the left side, where my wife used to rest her elbow. With a bag of frozen peas pressed against my ribs, the bruise had spread overnight, turning from red to a deep purple green, the kind that doesn't fade for weeks. The doctor at Kingston General had told me that much. Severe soft tissue damage. No fractures, which he'd said I was lucky to avoid at 63. I hadn't felt particularly lucky. I looked at the phone in my good hand, my son's name on the screen. My lawyer had told me not to answer. We'd spoken that morning, and she'd been clear. Let everything go through her until the paperwork was filed. But I'd been a civil engineer for 35 years. I fix things. I talk through problems. I still hadn't learned that some problems don't get fixed by talking. I answered. Dad. His voice was careful, measured in a way I recognized. The same voice he'd used as a teenager when he'd done something wrong and was trying to figure out how much I already knew. I was looking at the account this morning and the mortgage payment didn't go through. Did you? I mean, are you planning to? I looked out the window. The maple in the front yard was finished. All the leaves had come down in the October rain, and the branches were bare against a gray November sky. My wife had planted that tree the spring after we moved in, 28 years ago. She'd wanted something that would turn red in the fall. She never said anything about what it would look like after. Why would you think I paid your mortgage? I said. He exhaled. You've helped before, when we were short. Short. I shifted the peas and felt the pull through my whole side. Short meant he'd gone over on the visa again. Short meant the truck payment was due, and the renovation they'd started in June still wasn't finished. Short had meant, for the past several years, a phone call to me. I'm not in a position to help right now, I said. Dad, come on. We're going to be in real trouble here. The bank doesn't wait. I know what the bank does. I've been dealing with banks for 40 years. I watched a crow land on the fence post at the end of the yard, and I know what happened at Thanksgiving. I know what you did after. Silence. I'll be speaking through my lawyer from here on, I said. I think you know why. I ended the call, set the phone face down on the side table, went back to looking at the bare maple and the gray sky behind it. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting in the same chair waiting for them to arrive for dinner. Now I was sitting in it again, different weight in my chest entirely. Let me tell you how it happened. Let me tell you what the past year actually looked like, because it didn't start at Thanksgiving. It started the way quiet things often do, with something small that didn't add up. I retired 4 years ago, the same spring my wife was diagnosed. She was gone by August. 31 years of marriage, and then 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The engineers among you will understand when I say I didn't know how to process something I couldn't solve. I kept making lists. Lists of tasks, calls to make, things she'd want sorted after. It was the only thing I knew how to do with my hands when the rest of me wasn't functioning. My son helped in those early months, I'll give him that. He came back home for the funeral, stayed a week, called every Sunday for the first year. His wife was polite in that distant, professional way she had. Not unkind exactly, just present the way a stranger at an airport is present. We'd never clicked, the two of them and I, but she made my son happy, and I told myself that was enough. After the estate was settled, my son and I opened a joint account together. My accountant thought it was unnecessary. My lawyer at the time said to put a spending limit on it. I didn't listen to either of them. My wife had just died. My son was my only family. I gave him online access and the transfer PIN, and I told him clearly, only if something comes up, a real emergency. He said he understood. I believed him. The Tuesday in late July, a year ago now, I went into my branch to set up an automatic payment for the property taxes. My neighbor Amos had been after me about it since spring. He's known me since the year my wife and I moved in, and he has the particular talent of old friends who tell you what you need to hear without much concern for whether you want to hear it. The bank manager pulled up the account. He went still. I noticed because people don't usually go still when they look at account numbers. They click through screens the way you'd flip through a menu you've seen before. "Can I ask when you last reviewed the joint account?" he said. "April, maybe. I'd checked it after Easter because my son and his wife had visited, and I'd run some groceries through it for the weekend." He turned the screen toward me. The account had been active every month since the previous September. Wire transfers going out, always on a Tuesday or Wednesday, always initiated online. The amounts varied: $3 to $800 one month, $5 to $200 the next, then $4 to $100, then $6,000, 11 months. I did the arithmetic in my head before he could open a spreadsheet. $47,200. Gone, to an account number I had never seen. I sat in that chair across from his desk for longer than I can account for. His voice had gone distant, the way sound does underwater. He was asking whether I had authorized transfers, whether I had added anyone else to the account. The IP address logs showed that none of the transfers had been initiated from my home network. They'd come from somewhere else, somewhere consistent. I had not added anyone else to the account. I had authorized one transfer 11 months ago. $3,000 when my son said the furnace was failing and they needed it by Friday. I'd told him to use the joint account. Just that once. He'd used the PIN I gave him, and then he'd given it to her. The manager printed 11 months of statements and put them in an envelope. He spoke quietly about the options available to me, about the fraud department, about the fact that since my son had legitimate access, the situation was complicated, but his wife did not have any access at all, and that mattered legally. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I didn't open it for 2 days. When I finally did, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold beside me, I built a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, cumulative total. Engineers make spreadsheets the way other people say prayers. It doesn't fix anything, but it gives your hands something to do. $47,200, almost exactly what it had taken my wife and me to build the back extension, the one with the good windows and the bookshelves she'd always wanted. I thought about calling my son, nearly did 4 or 5 times over the following weeks. Each time I stopped, because I kept coming back to the same question. He had the PIN. He had the access. If she had been doing this for 11 months, he either knew or he had chosen not to look. I didn't know which was worse. I wasn't sure it mattered. I called a different lawyer, one who'd handled my brother's estate a few years back, sharp and direct. She told me not to confront anyone until everything was documented. So I waited. I copied the statements. I got the bank's internal records showing which IP address had initiated each transfer. I let the Thanksgiving invitation stand because I had already decided that was where this was going to happen, sitting across from both of them, face to face, in my house, at my table, with the evidence in front of us, not over the phone, not by message, not through a letter they could set aside and ignore. Canadian Thanksgiving is the second Monday of October. I'd made dinner the same way I had every year since my wife died, trying to approximate what she would have done, getting close but never quite right. I brined the turkey breast the night before. I made stuffing from scratch. I drove out to the farm stand on the highway for apple cider because she always said the grocery store kind tasted like soap. They arrived at 3:30. My daughter-in-law came in first, shaking the rain off her jacket as if she were annoyed at the weather personally. She set a store-bought pumpkin pie on the counter. First time she'd ever brought anything. And looked around my kitchen with that expression she always wore in my house, like she was doing a quiet inventory of everything and finding it wanting. "Smells good," she said. It didn't sound like a compliment, more like a notation. My son came in behind her, kissed my cheek the way he had since he was small, and went straight to the fridge for a beer. He seemed louder than usual, easier in his movements. I noticed I'd been noticing things differently for 3 months. We ate. We talked about safe things. His job, the road construction coming through town, whether we'd see an early winter. My daughter-in-law ate efficiently and checked her phone once under the table. After dinner, she poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle I kept on the counter for guests. My wife's wine, a Riesling from the Niagara Peninsula she'd always liked. Poured it without asking and settled onto the couch as though she'd lived there for years. That was fine. I hadn't invited them for the wine. I waited until they were settled. Then I came in from the kitchen with the envelope and sat in the chair across from them. "I need to talk to you both about something," I said. My son set down his beer. My daughter-in-law looked up from her phone. I laid the bank statements on the coffee table, 11 months of them, fanned out so every transfer was visible. $47,200, I said. That's what's been transferred out of the emergency account since last October. Wire transfers initiated online. The bank has the IP logs. My son's face went still in a way I recognized from when he was a child caught in a lie, not calculating, just frozen, like he was waiting to see which way things would fall. "Dad." "I didn't authorize those transfers," I said. "I authorized one, $3,000 for the furnace. Last November." I looked at my daughter-in-law. "The rest came from your IP address. I have the records." She didn't flinch. She set her phone face down on the cushion beside her and looked back at me with the same flat expression she'd worn appraising my kitchen. "We needed money," she said. "His company cut his hours last spring. I lost 2 listings in a row. The bills were stacking up." "I understand that," I said. "What I don't understand is why you took it without telling me." "Because you would have said no." The honesty of it stopped me for a moment. She was right. I would have said no to $47,000. I would have said, "Sit down. Let's look at what you actually need and work through it properly." I would have said, "I have surgery coming up and savings that aren't as deep as you think." I would have said no. So she hadn't asked. My son got up from the couch and moved toward the coffee table, and for a half second I thought he was going to pick up the statements. "Look at them. Sit back down and have an honest conversation." Instead, he gathered them into a pile and held them out toward me. "You need to let this go," he said. His voice had flattened in a way I didn't recognize. Not his voice exactly, more like something wearing it. "It was a hard year. We'll pay it back." "When?" "When we can." "That money was for my hip surgery," I said. "It's scheduled for February. The provincial plan covers most of it, but not everything. That account was the gap." "You can defer it." I looked at him. My son. 40 years old, standing in my living room, telling me to defer a surgery I'd been waiting 14 months for, as though pain were something you could reschedule. "No," I said, "I can't." Something shifted in his face. Not remorse. I kept waiting for that, and it didn't come. Something closer to irritation, like I was being difficult about a minor administrative matter. "You have a pension. The house is paid off." His voice was climbing. "You have more than most people will ever see. What are you even saving it for?" "That's not the point." "Then what is the point? What do you want from us, Dad?" "We're sorry. Can we move on?" "I want the money returned, and I want you both to understand that what was done, what you allowed to happen, is theft. That's what I need you to hear." My daughter-in-law stood up. She was composed in that particular cold way, the way a room goes cold when the heat is cut off. "Theft," she repeated. "You're going to sit in this house with 4 bedrooms and a pension and a property worth more than we'll ever own and call us thieves. You're 63 years old and alone. And you're going to prosecute your own family over money that was just sitting there waiting for nothing." "It was waiting for my surgery," I said. Name one person it would have gone to after you. That one landed. I won't pretend it didn't. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Both of you. Have your lawyer contact mine. My son grabbed my forearm. I hadn't expected it. He was never a physical person. Not as a child, not ever. He grabbed my forearm and shoved me sideways, hard, the kind of force that surprised us both, and I reached out with my right hand to catch myself on the counter, and my palm came down on the corner, the sharp granite edge my wife had chosen, because she liked the clean lines. The cut was deep. I felt the heat of it before I felt the pain. My hip hit the cabinet door on the way down. I didn't lose consciousness, but the room tilted badly, and for a moment the ceiling and the light fixture swapped places. I heard my daughter-in-law say his name, low and hissing. I heard my son's footsteps stop. I lay on the kitchen floor and looked up at the light fixture my wife and I had put up together 17 years ago. The one we'd argued over in the hardware store, because I wanted something practical, and she wanted something that looked nice. She'd won that argument, same as most of them. I was glad she had. I heard them leave, the front door, the truck reversing out of the driveway. Then nothing but the kitchen clock and my own breathing. I got myself upright using the counter, left a handprint in red on the cabinet door, found a dish towel, wrapped my hand, and got to the phone. The 911 dispatcher had a calm voice and kept talking to me while I waited. She asked my name. She asked what had happened. She asked if I was still in danger. No, not anymore. The paramedics came in 8 minutes, then 2 police officers. I gave my statement twice, once at the house, once at the hospital. My palm needed 7 stitches. My ribs were badly bruised. The attending physician said I was fortunate none had cracked, and I told him my wife used to say I had a stubbornly solid build. He didn't know what to do with that, but he wrote it down anyway, which I appreciated. I called Amos from the hospital at 11 o'clock. He was there in 20 minutes, jacket pulled over his pajama shirt, and he sat with me until they discharged me past 2 in the morning. He didn't say much. Amos rarely does. But he was there, which was the point. The weeks that followed had a texture I hadn't experienced before. Not grief, which I knew well enough by then. Not clean anger either, though that was part of it. Something more like the aftermath of a structural failure. When you've been standing in a building that looked sound and then it wasn't, and you're standing in the rubble trying to figure out how much you missed and when. I filed the formal police report the morning after I was discharged. My lawyer came to my house that afternoon, and we spent 3 hours going through the financial records. She was methodical and calm, and when I finished, she said the evidence was comprehensive. She said that clearly, and she wasn't a woman who used words carelessly. The charges took several weeks to build properly. My son was charged with assault, causing bodily harm. My daughter-in-law was charged with fraud over $5,000 and unauthorized access, specifically initiating wire transfers from an account she had no legal standing to use. My son called, then stopped calling when the restraining order was served. He sent 3 letters through a mutual friend, which I forwarded to my lawyer unopened. My daughter-in-law tried twice through her father, who rang my doorbell on a cold Sunday morning in November and stood on the porch, looking like a man who'd been handed a task he'd never asked for. I opened the door. We'd met twice before, at the wedding and once at a holiday party years later. He looked older than I remembered. "She's my daughter," he said. "I had to try." "I understand," I said. "I have a son, I know what that means. But I can't drop the charges." He nodded, turned and walked back to his car without arguing. I changed the locks, closed the joint account and moved everything into accounts only I could access, updated my will. Confirmed the hip replacement was still scheduled for February. Then I waited. The preliminary hearing was in March. The trial was in June. I won't take you through every hour of it. A courtroom has its own particular weight, and I don't have the energy to relive each day. What I'll tell you is this. I testified for nearly 2 full days. His lawyer tried several approaches. I was confused by grief. I was isolated and perhaps hadn't fully understood the account's purpose. My son had acted in good faith on a reasonable belief. The fall was an accident. I'd been off balance already, physically and emotionally. I told the truth. I had the bank records, the IP address logs, the wire transfer trail, the medical photographs, the 911 recording. The truth had documentation, which is the best kind. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 3 counts between the 2 of them. My son, assault causing bodily harm. My daughter-in-law, fraud over $5,000, unauthorized use of a computer system. Sentencing was 6 weeks after the verdict. I sat in the back of the courtroom with Amos on one side and my lawyer on the other. The judge spoke for nearly 20 minutes before delivering the sentence. She noted the premeditated nature of the financial offense. 11 months, systematic, carefully kept below amounts that would have triggered automatic bank alerts. She noted that the assault, while perhaps impulsive in the moment, had caused genuine bodily harm to a 63-year-old man in his own home. She noted the absence of remorse from either defendant during the proceedings. My son received 12 months of house arrest, 200 hours of community service, and a restitution order for the full $47,200. No custodial sentence, though the judge noted it had been considered. He would carry a criminal record for the assault conviction. He would not be working in financial services again without significant difficulty. My daughter-in-law received 18 months of probation, her own criminal record for the fraud conviction, and was named jointly in the restitution order. The judge was direct. She had initiated the financial offense and had demonstrated no contrition. I sat with the word, remorse. The judge had used it twice, and I kept turning it over. That was the thing, wasn't it? Not only the money, not only the injury, though both of those mattered enormously, but the absence of remorse. My son had stood on my porch months before the trial and said he was sorry I was upset. He had not said he was sorry for what he had done. There is a difference. I spent 40 years building things that had to hold weight. I understood the difference between a structure that was sound and one that only looked it. Walking out of the courthouse into the November air, I felt the cold on my face, clean and without patience for anything other than itself. Amos held the door. He didn't say anything. I was glad. There wasn't anything to say that the day wasn't already saying. The hip replacement went ahead in February as planned. Recovery was harder than I'd expected, and more straightforward than I'd feared, which is about the average for most things. I spent 6 weeks moving carefully through my own house, relearning how to get up from a chair, discovering that the hallway is narrower than I'd realized, finding that the kitchen window at a particular angle in the morning fills the whole room with light, in a way I'd stopped noticing years ago. I started going to a walking group on Thursday mornings, mostly seniors, which I supposed I now was, though the word still sits a bit awkwardly. 8 of us. We walk the waterfront trail when the weather holds and complain about the city's road decisions when it doesn't. One of the women in the group had lost a sister to a similar situation. Money taken quietly over years, family who hadn't wanted to believe it. She told me over coffee at the Tim Hortons afterward that the hardest part hadn't been the legal process. It had been the silence after. When everything was done and the noise had settled, and you had to decide what to do with the life that was left. I told her I was still working on that part. She said that was probably the honest answer. The restitution payments come by check, mailed through his lawyer's office, $1,200 a month. I deposit them into the account I opened after I closed the joint one. My account, only my name, only my authorization. The surgery has been paid for. The balance is rebuilding. I've converted the spare bedroom, guest furniture out, a proper drafting table in. I bought a set of drawing tools I hadn't touched since I graduated, and I've been making detailed plans for things that don't strictly need to be built. A small boathouse on a lake lot I've been looking at north of town. A garden layout my wife always meant to draw up and never got around to. I don't know if I'll build any of them, but I like making the plans. I like the process of thinking through what something would need to hold weight. Amos comes over on Wednesday evenings. We drink coffee that is either terrible or very good, depending on whose turn it is to make it. We talk about nothing in particular, and sometimes we don't talk at all, which is its own kind of company. He's been my neighbor for 28 years, and I think I'd taken that for granted until this year taught me not to. My son has not reached out beyond the monthly checks. I don't expect he will, at least not for some time, maybe not ever. I've stopped trying to land on a single feeling about that. Some things don't resolve into one clean answer. Some's loads, you just learn to carry differently. Outside the front window, the maple my wife planted has started to bud again. First green of the year, small and tentative. The way spring arrives here. Uncertain, then suddenly committed. She used to stand at this very window and point out the exact moment when the color began to change. I used to tell her she was imagining it. I was wrong about that. I see it now.